So let's get started with the first module of CrowdStrike Certified SIEM Engineer, which is user management. Let's understand why do we need to, what are we doing in this module and why this module is very important. So we all understand that identity and access management is core to any security solution, and it's one of the critical domain of cybersecurity. Most of the solutions in cybersecurity, they have identity and access management module. Through that module, you can assign, you can you can onboard your end users, you can onboard your security tool, you can basically grant them access to that module, and you can also grant them access based on the roles and responsibilities of those team members, so that you will not grant standing access to all the team members or admin access to all the team members to perform everything based on their job responsibilities, or following the principle of separation of duty, you're granting them access. That is the same thing here. In when it comes to CrowdStrike security, or when it comes to CrowdStrike, Falcon UI, in the Falcon UI under host setup and management, you will have a module with the name Falcon users. Over here, you see user management, roles and permissions. So we first need to look at roles and permissions. So CrowdStrike has roles available, different roles available for different user personas when it comes to Falcon NG SIEM. And Falcon NG SIEM, it basically utilizes granular role-based access control, wherein it has permissions available to perform configurations in the NG SIEM console with respect to data onboarding, with respect to detection engineering, with respect to incident investigation, log enrichment, creation of custom detection rules, custom data connection, data connectors, as well as parsers, as well as working with or leveraging Fusion Store workflows. So it provides multiple permissions there. A total of 55 roles are available when it comes to CrowdStrike Falcon UI, which which are across multiple solutions. So if we are looking for specific roles for NG SIEM, what I can do, I can do Control F here, and I can type NG, or I can probably type NG-SIEM, and you will see all the roles which are related to NG SIEM. These are the roles that we are talking about here. These are the roles for NG SIEM. Now we can see all of these roles, and what information does it provide? It provides the role name. It provides the description of that role, one-liner description of what that role is, and what an identity or what an employee who is assigned that role can perform in the console, what action can be executed by that employee, or what is not allowed, for that employee, or what he or she cannot or can do. That's what it contains. Role type, whether that role is default. Default means this role is created by CrowdStrike, and you don't have an option to modify this role. However, if this role is not what you are looking for, or if you want to customize this role, probably for administrators, you don't want to give them the capability to delete any data connector. You don't want to give them the capability to delete any, detection rule or delete a dashboard once it is created. So you may want to customize a role, because if you grant them NG SIEM admin role, they will have the capability to both provision, manage, and delete. So that is where you can also create custom roles. I will talk about those roles. It shows the number of permissions and the users to which those roles are assigned. If I go back and see these roles, you will notice that we have a couple of roles here. So we have NG SIEM administrator role, we have NG SIEM analyst, we have NG SIEM analyst read-only role, then we have NG SIEM federated connection manager, NG SIEM federated connection courier, NG SIEM federated connection viewer, NG SIEM security lead, and NG SIEM trainees. These are the roles which are available. If you will notice that all of these roles, except for NG SIEM trainee, are default roles. NG SIEM trainee role is a custom role, which is a custom role that has been created. These are all default roles. Let's talk about what permissions do these roles contain, right? So it is very important that you configure the correct user role so that your users can effectively navigate when they basically navigate into the console. When they click on, when they look at this console, they should be able to see ng-SIEM as one of the module. It should be visible, and when they navigate in this module, you see a lot of configuration options are available. So the relevant configuration options should be visible to your users based on their separation of duty, based on their role in the team. If they are level 1 analyst, they should have access to all the detections that CrowdStrike is generating. They should have access to see the detections. They should have access to investigate that detection. However, since they are level 1 analyst, they will not have access to customize any existing security monitoring use cases or to probably configure data ingestion. They should not have this level of.
Come, come.
Okay. So
Come.
this is why these roles are important. Okay, let's move on. So now that we are looking at these roles, so it is very important that your users, that your admin, or that you as an admin configure these roles effectively so that your team members can effectively navigate, manage, and execute specific SIEM activities or SIEM workflows without being overprivileged. So we need to follow principle of least privilege here. We are not granting every person in the team ng-SIEM administrator role, which is the super admin role for ng-SIEM, or we are not granting everyone ng-SIEM analyst role because they might need to perform some administrative activities. So these are the default roles. And then as a customer or as an admin or as a architect, you can also create custom roles for your customer, for your own environment, which can be tailored to specific tier levels in your SOC environment. So depending on the size, scale, and complexity of an organization, you may have 10 team members in SOC, you may have 100 or 1,000 team members also. You may have flat hierarchical structure in SOC wherein everyone has the same level of permission, or you may have hierarchical structure wherein depending on the level of team member, which is level 1, level 2, level 3, then subject matter expert, then team lead, then manager, and then probably the senior manager or director, you will have different levels defined, and accordingly you will create custom roles. So let's understand these roles. So as I said, ng-SIEM administrator is the super admin role. And if you look, it contains 170 permissions. So what are the permissions for this role? When I click on role detail, you will notice that it will show you the permissions of this role. And over here, you will see that it has permissions related to ng-SIEM. So you can see the permissions. It has permissions on access scope, wherein it can read user access scope. It can write access scope. So you see the permissions. Now there are 170 permissions. So it will show you all the permissions which are there in CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has 2,000 plus permissions. Out of those 2,000 permissions, it has 170 permissions. So if I scroll it down, I'll show you the permissions that it has. Let me bring all the permissions on this page. Now you see all the permissions. Let's directly come to ng-SIEM and you will see it has ng-SIEM specific permissions. So it will have permissions related to ng-SIEM, which is detection content management platform. So ng-SIEM provides you this capability, which is in ng-SIEM, you have at the bottom unified content library. This contains the out-of-the-box connectors, out-of-the-box detection rules. This contains automation workflows. This contains log enrichment capabilities. It is your library of content. This is similar to Content Hub in Microsoft Sentinel, or this is similar to the content library in Google SecOps also. So you have content library. So who will have access to this content library? Obviously, your ng-SIEM administrator will have access to this content management library. All the capabilities are enabled here. Similarly, but ng-SIEM administrator doesn't have capability to create detection email content because this is done by the customer or probably the Falcon admin who will decide that who should be notified, right? But then if you feel that my ng-SIEM administrator should have the capability to create alerting and notification, should have the capability to customize the distribution list or emails that needs to be sent for certain alerts, you can basically come here and enable those permissions. But since this is a default role, you don't have permissions to modify it. So this role basically shows you the permissions. Now for mirroring, you have all the permissions because they are required for ng-SIEM administrator. Similarly, you can see here in the Falcon client, you only have one permission, which is writing execute queries, but rest of the permissions are missing. If you come down and if you come specific to ng-SIEM, you will see all the permissions related to ng-SIEM will be there. Over here, you can see marketplace services. So you have permissions to basically look for connectors, data connections from marketplace. Then you have additional permissions now ng-SIEM. So ng-SIEM has a total of 22 permissions. All 22 permissions are given to the ng-SIEM administrator because it's an admin role. And other than this, you have additional permissions related to other entities. So ng-SIEM admin has plugin permission. ng-SIEM admin has additional permissions. For example, ng-SIEM admin doesn't have any permission for real-time response because it is an admin. You will never ever expect your admin to get into the investigation triage and investigation response. So, but if you feel that your ng-SIEM admin should also have RTR capability, so if there is an impacted endpoint that you need to execute certain remote commands on, remote execution on, instead of taking RDP or SSH of that endpoint, or instead of creating a task for your infrastructure team to perform that activity, which will take a lot of time, you can also create a custom role and assign real-time responder roles to your ng-SIEM administrator. But by default, these roles are not assigned. So CrowdStrike has taken due consideration in deciding which role should have what level of permission. So you can see some permissions are there, some permissions are not there, and it's a huge list of permissions. Third-party data ingestion, all the permissions are enabled because as an ng-SIEM administrator, you're going to perform a lot of log ingestion, and that would involve ingesting logs from third-party data sources also. So you can see all the permissions are enabled. Right. Similarly, you have permissions for XDR because ng-SIEM is also known as inside XDR. This is the model name, or this is the product name in the backend. It is part of inside XDR, which includes both EDR plus ng-SIEM capability and becomes inside XDR product offering. So you have all the capabilities on XDR also. So these are all the permissions which are there for ng-SIEM administrator role. Now, ng-SIEM administrator is your the super admin role. After ng-SIEM administrator, you have ng-SIEM security lead. This is N-1, a role which is below ng-SIEM administrator. So what an ng-SIEM administrator can do, if you hover the mouse here, it shows that ng-SIEM administrator can assign other members of the team, other members of the SOC team a specific role. ng-SIEM administrator manages events, manages detections, incidents, and create and manage ng-SIEM schedule searches, custom ng-SIEM correlation rules. This rule used to be called XDR administrator. So this used to be known as XDR admin, but then XDR combined both EDR plus ng-SIEM, and this was creating a confusion because some customers would not use either EDR, they are only using XDR, and vice versa. So CrowdStrike separated those roles now. Now you have a separate Falcon, EDR roles and separate ng-SIEM roles. So the second role is ng-SIEM security lead. Now, what is this role? This role will not be able to add additional team members. It is, if you are from Microsoft Azure, there are two roles, owner and contributor. Owner has complete access to the subscription, and contributor also has complete access except for user administrator capabilities, user admin capabilities. So over here, the same concept applies that ng-SIEM security lead will have all the capabilities that ng-SIEM administrator will have, except for the capability which is to add additional users in the console. So user management capability is not there. Rest of the capabilities are available. Most of the capabilities are available. So this is ng-SIEM security lead. After that, so consider this is your L3 role, which is admin role. This is your L2 role, and then ng-SIEM analyst is your L1 role. This is the role which will allow you to manage ng-SIEM detections and incidents, view ng-SIEM events, create ng-SIEM schedule searches, So you can go to advanced event search. You can create a search query and you can schedule that query to run at a specific schedule. You can also save that query. So this role is used to be known as XDR analyst. So we have these three main roles. After these three main roles, we have four additional roles also available, which is the NG SIEM analyst read only. Now this is a level below NG SIEM analyst. So imagine if you have somebody who has recently joined the team, SOC team, and you're using CrowdStrike NG SIEM, the person has absolutely no idea about CrowdStrike. But you want that person to slowly and gradually pick up and learn CrowdStrike NG SIEM. So rather granting a role that would allow that person to make configuration changes, you would allow that person read-only role. And with this role, the team member would be able to navigate through NG SIEM console, would be able to click on NG SIEM, see all the capabilities which are there, click on those capabilities also, however, would not be able to configure, manage, or modify an existing configuration. It's read only, would not be able to perform advanced event search, would not be able to query data, but would be able to see what queries are there, would be able to see what data is flowing in. It's read only role basically. That's what this role is all about. So it's NGC read-only role. There are three additional roles which are related to federation. So when you are integrating the third-party data sources, or when you are creating a federation with cloud service providers, you basically use these three roles, which is federation connection manager, somebody who has the capability to perform federation. So with this role, you will be able to manage the federated connections. So you will be able to configure integration with cloud service providers. You will be able to generate API keys and API, secret key and API URL, and configure connectors in push and pull mode. That's what connection manager does. Connection querier, this is a level below connection manager. This person will not be able to configure the connection, but will be able to execute query against a federated connection to get certain data. And then you have connection viewer, which is a read-only role. This person would be able to see what all data connections are available, what all federations is configured, and would be able to read that configuration. So we have a total of, if you see here, we have a total of 7 roles which are available. Administrator, the top level, security lead, level 2. I'd say from the level you can see this is your admin level. Security lead is N-1, security SIEM analyst is N-2, and then read only is N-3. And these are specific roles, explicit roles. They only come into the picture when you need that specific capability. When you basically have a third party who is supporting for integration, then you assign these roles. And accordingly, you can see NG SIEM has maximum permissions, then security lead has lesser permissions, analyst has the least permissions 70, and then NG SIEM read only has only 54 permissions. And then we have specific permissions available for these capabilities, which is 10, 12, and 27. So these are my permissions. Okay. Then we have also created this NG SIEM trainee role. Now this is a custom role that has been created for all the participants who will need to be granted access to NG SIEM module. For all of you who have registered for this and paid for NG SIEM console access or module access, you will be granted access to this role so that you can perform all the activities in this training session. So that's how the roles are bifurcated. So it is very important that you understand these roles from the exam perspective also, because in the exam, they will ask you questions, they will give you a scenario and say, what is an appropriate role to achieve this use case? So there will be a scenario that an administrator of XYZ corporation will need to create security monitoring use cases, which would involve creation of security monitoring use cases for blah and blah. And then it would ask you, select an appropriate role that would be required to be granted to this person. So you will get questions related on RBAC in the exam. This is very important that you understand this concept. Let's understand the custom role part. If I need to create a custom role, how will I create it? So there are two options to create a custom role. I can create a custom role by clicking on create role over here, providing the role name, which is demo custom role. I can say ng SIEM. Provide a description of this role. Now, who can create a custom role? Falcon admin. ng SIEM admin cannot create a custom role. ng SIEM admin can only assign other people access to ng SIEM module. But custom role creation is limited to Falcon administrator. So I can hit create role. So you probably won't have access to these modules because these are administrative modules and they have absolutely nothing to do with this ng SIEM topic. But from architecture perspective, you need to have this information. So I've created this custom role. Now this role will populate all the permissions which are there in CrowdStrike, all the permissions. And you can see I can select items, all items per page, and I'll see all the permissions available now. So this list is endless. Look at the cursor, which is on the right hand side when I'm moving it down. This is all of it. Now, depending on what role I want to run, for example, let's say I'm creating a custom role that I want my ng SIEM admin to make use of Shadlow AI, to interact with Shadlow AI, to be able to get certain information. So what I'll do, I'll click on edit permission, and then I will select the appropriate checkboxes, the appropriate permissions that I want my ng SIEM engineer or ng SIEM administrator to have, and hit save. When I hit save, these specific permissions will be enabled. So the permissions now are enabled for this specific role. So this is how you will continue to create it. So for example, we have enabled these 12 permissions for this custom role. So this is how you will click on these permissions one by one, whichever permissions you need to assign to your ng SIEM people. Let's say you want to assign, you don't want the delete permissions to be given to your team members. So you will come to Next-Gen SIEM. Here you see delete dashboards, delete files, delete this and that. So what you will do over here, since you're creating this custom role, you'll come to this and you will create permissions. Probably that role is saved. So I need to come back. Yeah, permissions. So you will need to basically create. So basically I need to click on edit once again because it has basically saved that role. So you will need to assign all of these permissions one after another. And in the end, you will save this role. And you can manage this custom role yourself also whenever you need to manage this role yourself. So you will create those roles. So that's how you will create a custom role. So similarly, we have created a custom role here, if you notice, which is ng trainees. If I click on this custom role, view role details, you will see that this role contains a total of 47 permissions. And these 47 permissions will allow you to manage every minute aspect of ng SIEM. All the aspects of ng SIEM you will see here, which you would need as an ng SIEM administrator. So you all will be granted administrative role. So over here, you will notice that if I scroll down, it contains all the roles. It contains specific roles of ng SIEM here. It contains these specific roles for ng SIEM trainings. Okay, so these are this is the concept of user management that you need to be aware of when it comes to setting up ng SIEM environment, and when it comes to granting team members access to ng SIEM module so that they can perform activities, they can execute actions, they can perform remediations based on their level that you will identify and you will discuss and agree with your customer. Okay, so that completes the user management module that we were discussing. So you can see what is user management. Quickly, let's go through the slide. So user management is the process of creating, controlling, and managing user access to Falcon ng SIEM resources. It ensures that the users have the right level of access. Why this is important? It is important because it will maintain security and access control, or it will allow you to adhere to the principle of best practices of identity and access management, which is principle of least privilege, separation of duty, just-in-time access, SSO, MFA, and whatnot. And it will also help you maintain accountability through user activity tracking, because for each action, you will see the information in the audit log. What are the key components? So you have users, you have roles, and you have permissions. So users are you all guys are users. Roles, I was just showing you those 55 roles which are there in Falcon, and permissions are part of the roles that basically defines whether you can view data, whether you can configure settings, whether you can manage those settings, whether you can perform investigations. So these are some of the roles, which is security analyst, NG SIEM security analyst, NG SIEM engineer. We don't have this role anymore available. NG SIEM administrator and SOC manager is a different role. So these are some of the common roles which are available. Okay, what configurations are required? So these are the roles and permissions that you can see. And it basically shows you common role examples and categories. So if you grant somebody read access, the person will be able to view dashboard, detections, and events. That's what role is all about. Then I showed you how to create a custom role, that you can create a custom role from, from scratch, or you can clone an existing role and then customize the permissions of that role. Both the options are available. So that was about steps to create a custom role. That was about user management in Falcon NG SIEM.
I have a couple of questions.
Please go ahead.
Suppose if we are just using CrowdStrike Falcon as a NG SIEM, not as a EDR or XDR. So in that case, suppose if we are using CrowdStrike Falcon just as a NG SIEM, not as a EDR and XDR. So in that case, we need to install CrowdStrike Falcon sensor on all the endpoints or not required. And second question.
No, we don't need to. Why? Because if you're not using EDR capabilities, obviously you will not need to require Falcon sensor on the endpoint. However, if you want to collect data, log data from endpoints, you will have two options. If you have sensors installed on the endpoint, all you got to do is to push log collector configuration from the console. The sensor will receive that configuration and would know what all event logs it needs to collect and send it to CrowdStrike Logscale or CrowdStrike Cloud. Sensor would know. But if you don't have sensor installed, then you would need to download and install log collector on all the endpoints from where you want to collect the logs. So it is your choice. If you have EDR module before you subscribe to NG SIEM, your life is sorted. It will not take much time to configure log collection on the endpoints. It will be done with a few clicks. You will just need to create a log collector policy, define all the endpoints that the policy should be scoped to, or the endpoints that should send logs to CrowdStrike Cloud, and it will be done in the backend. You don't need to do anything. But imagine a situation wherein you are not using Falcon endpoint detection and response, and you're only using NG SIEM module. You tell CrowdStrike that, I'm using Defender for endpoint. I'm using, some other endpoint detection and response solution, and I would like to use NG SIEM, and I would probably want to ingest EDR logs into NG SIEM. In that case, CrowdStrike would say, okay, let's go ahead with it. So then CrowdStrike has the capability, CrowdStrike has the concept of log collector. So you basically create log collectors, and those log collectors will allow you to configure log ingestion, a logic to those endpoints. So over here under fleet management, we have the concept of log collectors. So right now you will see we have got two log collectors, and these log collectors are basically collecting logs from these two hosts, which is Cloud Expert -desktop and LC stands for log collector -East US -Windows 10. So this log collector is an on-premises endpoint. This log collector is a cloud VM. It's a Microsoft Azure VM. So that's what you will do. So it's your choice whether you want to go with EDR and have your life simplified with one sensor taking care of everything, or you don't want to go with EDR, no sensor at all, then you will need to deploy log collector from this console. And definitely this is what I'm going to cover for in this session, wherein you all will deploy a log collector. You all have access to your own infrastructure. So bringing infrastructure is your responsibility because it's a multi-month training. I cannot afford to give you infrastructure access. So you will bring your own infrastructure, which means you will have access to, you will either build your endpoints in VMware, in Hyper-V. If you have that capability available, or you will subscribe to one of the cloud service providers trial account. And from there, you will bring endpoints, and then you will configure those endpoints to ingest logs into NGSIEM. And also will explore additional capabilities of NGSIEM with respect to integrating that cloud account with NGSIEM or configuration of log collectors. Yes, Mayur. I hope I answered the other question
Yeah,
also.
yeah. So this log collector is also like a lightweight agent, which we need to
Uh,
deploy on every system.
okay, so these log collectors serve two purposes. You can deploy log collector directly on the endpoint, and you can define the configuration. This is the configuration file, which basically tells what kind of logs needs to be collected from that endpoint. This is configured in push mode. So endpoint will receive this configuration file. It would know what configuration it needs to push to the console, right? That's one way. The other way is you can deploy log collector as a gateway. When you are not deploying log collector on each and every endpoint, you are probably using so imagine a situation wherein you have third party, third party data sources such as network devices. So obviously you can't deploy log collector on a firewall. You can't install anything on the firewall. So in that case, what you will do, you will basically extract, or you will export logs from firewall to a syslog, and then you will configure syslog to send logs to the log collector appliance or log collector endpoint or log collector gateway, whatever you call it. And then from that log collector, the logs will be ingested into NGSIEM. So it serves two purposes. It acts as a lightweight agent directly running on the endpoint. And if you can't install it on the endpoint, then you can provision a VM, configure that VM as a log collector, and have that VM configured to accept log from third-party sources, normalize them, compress those logs, cache those logs, encrypt them, and securely transfer those logs, or securely dump those logs into CrowdStrike NGSIEM console. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure. And my other question was, suppose if you are starting with 500 endpoints in the beginning, and then later we are expanding, let's say 1,000 endpoints or 2,000 endpoints. So in that case, license will again increase for the NGSIM or not, or it will just depend upon the log ingestion.
Log ingestion. It has nothing to do with the number of endpoints. It has nothing to do with the number of users having access to NGSIEM console. Absolutely nothing to do. What NGSIEM is licensed on, or what NGSIEM is priced for, is the amount of log data that you are ingesting, irrespective of whether it is coming from 10 systems or 10,000 systems, whether it is coming from Windows, whether it is coming from Linux, whether it is coming from Mac OS, Android OS, iOS, or whether it is coming from some custom data source, which is sending logs in a different format. At the end of the day, NGSIEM has the capability to transform that raw log, convert that raw log into the format that it understands, a format that allows a SIEM analyst to write, schedule searches or search queries to search for logs.
I have one question. Like example, like there are different types of logs. We know like we can install the collector and we can collect the logs. API, we know it's very straightforward. You need to put the API keys and it will collect the logs. But consider if it is a syslog, which is on premises or on cloud, where you said like we need to create a VM machine which will collect all the syslogs and it will send to the SIM. So to the CloudStrike. So that collector which we will be building, is it, does it CloudStrike provide some OVA file or something like that, or it's a standard VM machine? Because when we collect the syslogs from like firewall or Linux and all that, the IP address of the VM it doesn't come the original IP address. So in that's the how we will overcome this challenge in that case.
Okay, so keep this question parked. We will
Okay.
discuss this while we perform log onboarding. Okay.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
However, to give you answer to that question, CrowdStrike doesn't provide any OVA. It's a standard format. You can deploy syslog just as you do it with any other Siemens source solution, and you configure it in the same manner. Syslog has inbound stream and outbound stream. So outbound stream will point to the log collector. Inbound stream will come from different log sources. That could include Windows, that could include Linux log sources. It could include firewall, IDS, IPS, or any log sources. So the process is almost the same. There is no significant difference in the process in terms of how do we configure and how do we configure the log ingestion from third-party data sources via syslog to log collector to CrowdStrike. However, we will discuss that in detail when the right time comes. Okay, Mohit has some questions. Can one user be assigned multiple roles? Yes. Can we create a dashboard only role for? Can we create a dashboard only role for customers? You want to say you want your customers to be able to see the dashboards only. Only
Yes, sir.
dashboard.
Like currently I'm working in a MSSP environment. So like if we want to provide a customer like with access to only dashboard and reports without
You can
allowing them
you
to
have,
view roles.
yeah. So
So
the answer
like
is yes.
yes, yes.
Dashboard and reporting column, you can select the appropriate permissions for your customer, and your customer will only have access to that. In fact, you can share dashboards with your customer. So once you create a dashboard, you will see an option to make it public, and you can share that dashboard with your customer. That dashboard will have a public endpoint, and customer will receive a URL. Customer can click on the URL and can directly see the dashboard rather than logging into CrowdStrike console to see that dashboard. So that capability is also available.
Sir, can you please show over the console? This thing?
That that we will do when we reach to that point. Okay,
Okay,
let's
okay. Thank you,
let's
sir.
stick your questions. Let's restrict your question to user management, the module that we have just completed. Any other participant, any question from user management perspective? Okay, if there are no more questions from user management perspective, I'll consider user management module or the first module of CrowdStrike Certified SIEM Engineer complete. Play hands-on lab. We are done with the theoretical aspects. This is what we needed to do. This is what we needed to understand from design and architecture perspective. Since this is a cloud native solution, there is very little that you can do from design and architect perspective. However, you should understand, conclude, and decide on the log ingestion strategy, log volume, licensing, log scale, log repository location in terms of CrowdStrike Cloud Data Center, and also the user management part. So once you're done with it, the time comes when you want to ingest data. So in order to ingest data, CrowdStrike basically provides you two options. The first option is to ingest data, you can directly navigate to uh, Next-Gen SIEM, and then you can navigate to data onboarding under log management. It will take you to this window where you will see data onboarding capabilities. I'm saying in this one UI, you will configure everything. From left to right, we will explore all the options and we will also configure those options. So here you see all the data connections, the existing connections that you have, as well as the CrowdStrike out of the box data sources which are available from CrowdStrike or from third parties. So you see a total of 201 data connectors. Obviously, you're not going to install all of them, but since I will provide you access to this console and you will all have administrative access, you have my liberty to go ahead and configure any data connector. Obviously, you should have access to that data source also. So you can only configure AWS data connectors when you have access to an AWS account, right? So if you have access to a specific data source, we have a couple of vendors here. We have Anthropic, Akamai, Amazon, Abnormal Security, Cohesity, Clarity, CyberArk, Okta, Dropbox, Dhruva, Adobe, Epic. We have 200 plus vendors available here. Whichever product you want to ingest logs from to CrowdStrike SIEM, and if you happen to have license of that product because the configuration is at both sides, go ahead and configure the log ingestion. I will not stop you. Whether you ingest 10 GB log, whether you ingest 100 GB log, whether you ingest 1 petabytes of log. Since this portal is coming from sponsorship, we don't bother about it. Go ahead and configure whatever you want to configure. That's totally up to you. However, since we have limited time in this training, I will also configure some log sources, which are bare minimum and very important for all of the, for understanding the SIEM as a service, NG SIEM as a service from design and architect perspective, and also to clear the CCSE and CCSA exam in the very first attempt. Okay, so these are the data connectors which are available. So you can see that I have already tested some data connectors after this access was enabled for me. From our contact, I have basically configured some data connectors and checked whether this portal or this module is working as expected. So you can see I already have data getting ingested from Okta. So I've tested an identity and access management connector that I have access to. Basically, I have license of Okta. I've also, configured data connector for, you can see I configured data connector for M365 Defender, which is I have license of Microsoft 365 Defender. So that data connection, connector is configured. And you can see that the data is also flowing in. Obviously, there is very little or no activity I'm doing in those services. So you see some data flowing in. And then I also have data connected for Windows, clients. So you can see some almost 2.5 MB of data has flown in the last 24 hours from those endpoints. So some data connectors I have configured. Some data connectors you will see are giving certain errors. I have intentionally deleted the configuration because they are quite expensive. So in order to ingest data from Microsoft Azure, you're using Event Hub. Event Hub is an expensive service. So what I will do when we start with data onboarding part, when I need to give you a demo of Google Azure and my Google Azure and AWS, I will do that configuration right in front of you in the session. I will show you that the configuration has started bringing data. We will validate that yes, the data ingestion has started from that configuration. And after the session is over, I will disconnect the connector. Otherwise, it will continue to build because when I did this configuration, within a couple of hours, it billed me more than 1000 INR. So since this is my own cost, because you are paying in Azure this cost, that is why I disconnected the connector. So we will do all of this configuration in the next session. So you all should have access to this module, which is data connection module. Here you will do the connector configuration. The other option to do it, right in the module at the bottom, you see connectors here. So you will see that option also here. So we will go ahead and do the data connector configuration for different log sources. I basically have a separate document that I basically use here, which I used for most of my SIEM and SOAR training sessions. Here, this is the document for Sentinel-1 AI SIEM. So I'm just trying to transform this document for CrowdStrike NG SIEM. So these are the data connectors that I have in mind that we will configure, which is we will configure public cloud data connectors. So I'll show you how we can ingest logs from different services of Microsoft Azure using Event Hub. The same capability, I will demonstrate it for AWS and GCP Cloud. GCP, I need to check because CrowdStrike doesn't have more integration capabilities available with Google Cloud as we speak. With AWS and Azure, it is quite integrated well. So then we will configure data ingestion from both Windows and Linux. We'll also configure data ingestion from Entra ID, from AWS IAM, GCP Cloud Identity. We'll configure data ingestion from activity logs in Azure, CloudTrail, and GCP audit logs. We'll configure data ingestion, VPC flow logs, storage logs. If required, we'll configure data ingestion from databases. You can provision an RDS instance in AWS or Azure SQL Pass in Azure or Cloud SQL in GCP. We can configure data ingestion. I'll show you firewall log ingestion from one of the firewall services in cloud because I don't have an on-premises environment wherein I can configure a firewall and show you how to ingest logs from firewall. So anything that we don't have access to, we will try to curate that access. We will try to replicate that access in cloud. So we'll try to configure that service in cloud and simulate log ingestion from there. I'll also show you marketplace integration, and then I'll also show you log scale. I'll also show you syslog connection method. Obviously, you will not have switches and router, but instead of switches and router, we'll configure the syslog for firewall. So you need to understand that part, and then I'll also show you log collector method. So I'm basically trying to optimize the sheet so that you will understand, so that we follow the sheet end to end. And then I'll also share the sheet that will help you to recap what we have learned or what you need to know in NGC. So that's what we are going to do. So whatever ingestion options are available that we can easily procure without spending money, or any ingestion option that is available as a trial, we'll go ahead and configure that log ingestion. And as I said, if I configure log ingestion for 10 data sources, it doesn't mean that you will restrict yourself to 10.